So, right after I published my recent video on the Firefox terms of use and my opinion and stance on this latest blunder for Mozilla, I was contacted by Ryan Sipes, working for Thunderbird at the MZLA subsidiary of Mozilla. He wanted to talk this through and explain a few more things, so he took the weekend to gather a bunch of information from inside Mozilla, and we had a talk that we recorded yesterday, which I'm going to present to you right now after this message from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Proton VPN. You probably already know about Proton Mail, one of the most secure and private email services out there, but they also have their VPN service, which is equally as secure and private. It's also based in Switzerland, and it doesn't log any activity, and it doesn't share any data with third parties. Of course, it is fully encrypted, so you can use it from any public Wi-Fi or at home to either change your location or just stay anonymous online. On top of that, Proton VPN uses a 10 gigs per second network plus a suite of VPN accelerators, so even when you're using it, your browsing stays really fast. Proton VPN supports all your devices, PC or mobile, and they can even run on routers. And they've just completely rebuilt their Linux desktop client for it as well, complete with advanced features like a DNS filter to block ads and trackers, a kill switch to stop your internet connection if the VPN connection drops so your IP is never exposed, plus Secure Core, which provides a double VPN to provide a server located in a country where strong privacy laws apply. I don't usually recommend VPN services, but Proton VPN is my pick of choice. And you can use it for free by clicking the link in the description below, or they also have paid plans for more features and even more security. So yeah, click the link in the description to get started with Proton VPN. Thank you, Ryan, for joining me. Thank you for reaching out and asking to be on the channel just to talk about this specific issue. I thought first thing we would just recap the Mozilla situation. I already did a previous video on this, but I just wanted to outline the context, and once I'm done, you'll tell me if I represented it correctly or if I left some parts out. So the thing that happened is Mozilla added some terms of use to Firefox specifically, the Firefox web browser, and they communicated about this saying, hey, these are the new terms of service, terms of use that we added. These terms were viewed as very broad, basically giving permission to Mozilla and Firefox to collect a lot of information. Only the stuff that would help Firefox work as a browser, but the definition was pretty vague. The community didn't really appreciate how it was written. There was also the fact that those terms could be updated in the background without specifically notifying users of that change. And all the data collected was outlined in the privacy policy, which, as far as I can tell, has not changed. It seems to be sane for now, but it could also be updated in the background without specifically notifying users. People were mad about this, and so they updated their blog post initially saying that those terms did not give them any ownership of personal data and that they still do not collect anything other than what is outlined in the privacy policy. They also stated that they did not want to sell any personal data, even though they did remove any mention of not selling personal data from the material that used to have these mentions. And their explanation for this was that there's a new Californian law that is redefining the term selling data in a very, very broad sense. And so some stuff that Mozilla was doing could have been interpreted as selling data, probably the partnership with Google as the default search engine, where when you type in the Omni bar of Firefox, you do send some information to Google, and that could have been covered under the selling data umbrella of this new Californian law. And then they further clarified, I think it was a week afterwards, that they did need those terms of service because people were asking, why do you need this since you've operated without it for a while? Why do you need those terms? And they said it's because new European regulators are telling us we do need to clarify this for our users. And same goes for the new Californian law as well, which makes them have to use some legal terms here and there. So did I resume this situation accurately? Did I leave anything out?
Perfect. It's
Okay.
absolutely perfect. You did a great job, Nick. It saved me having to share a lot of information. And
Nice.
just to give people further background, I'm Ryan. I'm a managing
Yeah.
director for MZLA. We do Thunderbird. So we're not, the terms of service rolled out from the corporation isn't actually, doesn't actually affect us. And we can choose to do something different. That's, but as I kind of got into this further, and I'd been talking to some of the folks who were looking into this project early on, because in jurisdictions in Europe, we also receive complaints
Hmm.
saying, hey, you don't have a terms of service, you need a terms of service. And our response was, we have our um, Mozilla public license
Yeah.
and we have our privacy policy. So we didn't really see the need for a terms of service because we thought that our users were covered there. And this is where Firefox got caught up in feeling as though they needed to do this.
Hmm.
And if you talk to the regulators, they say, yes, of course they need to do it. Is you have a lot of pressure right now as these laws have gone into effect to be really transparent
Hmm.
about what you're doing and formal about what you're doing, which is the other piece of this. In the formality, these laws are not made for a Firefox or especially not for a Thunderbird.
Yeah.
They're made for, and I think about it in terms of a Microsoft Outlook, which is doing shady stuff with your data.
Yeah.
And so the language they want you to use and the things that they want you to outline, you have to touch on, but it's not always applicable or in a way that it's hard to describe this stuff in a way that both fulfills what the regulators and the law want to see versus what you're trying to communicate to your
Yeah.
users. And so what we're seeing with the corporation is them trying to walk that line and learning live in front of the whole world how to walk that line in a way that both gives the regulators what they want to see and the users reassurance that they're not doing anything shady. And frankly, I do think that the first draft, what they shared out with folks, which they shared before they actually rolled it out to users, and they expected to get some good feedback, so they did. Now, it raised a bunch of people's alarms, and that's unfortunate. But but we needed that in order to understand, what expectations were. At least
Hmm.
we're very happy as Thunderbird to have that because now we can craft anything we have to ultimately produce,
Yeah.
thinking about what the reaction was here.
Yeah, you have a perfect blueprint of how not to communicate about your own terms of use when you actually do need to implement some.
Mhm. But I wanna say, I caught up with some of the folks who crafted this and they're open source enthusiasts their whole lives and they just happen to be lawyers who are and they're talking about, you know, the stuff that they were surprised by. And I thought it was really interesting because the non-exclusive royalty-free worldwide license sounded scary to a lot of folks.
Yeah.
And it even sounded scary to me on first read. But then going through each word, it's like, okay, it means literally we don't have exclusive rights to your
Yeah.
data, not exclusive. They have users across the world, so they put it worldwide because users are everywhere. All their users are everywhere. And uh the royalty free is they didn't pay a royalty for the user's data, you know. But it sounds terrible.
Yeah, and
Legal language like that sounds
yeah,
terrible.
it's the difficulty with those things. Like I work for a bunch of startups and a bunch of bigger companies, like 6,000, 7,000 employees in France specifically. But every time we had to craft those legal mentions, what we call mention légale in French, so legal mentions, basically the legal boilerplate of what the website is allowed to collect, not collect. When we had to implement everything related to the GDPR as well, we worked with lawyers, and what they gave us was extremely difficult to understand, but also extremely scary for anyone who actually read those terms. And I totally understand that this is a hard thing to present, but I also feel like Mozilla did an absolutely terrible job of presenting and communicating these terms because They knew what the reason was for implementing those. Those were various regulations. It was no secret.
Yeah.
There was no really good reason
Yep.
to keep that as a secret, so they should probably have led with that. And very likely there should have been multiple passes of communication ahead of time. And there's still the issue that now that those terms are here, they do still grant a license to Mozilla for collecting some data. They can modify those terms in the background without notifying users, and they can use whatever is laid out in the privacy policy, which they can also modify in the background without notification, to collect more stuff. And I think this is still not a really solved problem. It's either you trust Mozilla to never do it, or you don't trust them to never do it because you basically gave them the keys to your data in the future. And I'm sure a lot of people in my community, in the Thunderbird, in the Firefox community, if any inkling of those terms changing is even sniffed in the air, people will just freak out. But a lot of Mozilla users or Firefox users are probably not as tech savvy, and they probably might not know about those changes. So it's still sort of a worrying foot in the door, and this hasn't really been addressed by Mozilla currently.
I think I told you this, in an off the record conversation. I think that the problem is, and what we're going to have to solve, and this is one of my key things that I'm going to be advocating for within Mozilla, is how do we set up some kind of process, and that sounds maybe a little too formal, where we're having this conversation with the folks in our community who care a lot about this. Because ultimately, the what we were trying to accomplish, what the corporation was trying to accomplish, and I say we because, I do feel like a part of the Mozilla community, is providing as much. It's like, okay, we have to do this. Let's provide as much transparency as possible. And that truly is where, the folks working on it came from, is like, even if the language sounds scary, we're going to try to be as transparent so that the users know what we're doing. We don't misrepresent what we're trying to do. And the issues that arose out of it were exactly what you said, which is we should have had folks from the community reviewing it and providing feedback throughout the entire process. That's certainly now, and I said this on one of our mailing lists, what Thunderbird is going to do now. Draft it, send it out on the mailing list, let it get torn apart, go back, try again, if we have to, if it turns out we have to do this.
But it's normal to have that sort of feedback loop. And I mean, the first iteration of those terms could be perceived as absolutely horrendous, but as long as they're communicated as being, it's a draft, this is what our lawyers gave us, we're not sure you gonna like that, this is what we absolutely need to mention, this is how it's currently written, let us know if this sounds scary, weird, not weird. That's a good way of handling it, instead of saying, hey, here are the terms, and just deal with it.
I know from your video that, you're not going to be pleased with this answer, perhaps, but we have to learn. There aren't many open source projects that are truly open source in both spirit and in practice that are like us. And so we're learning painfully in public because we're the only ones who operate at this scale, this way. Other open source projects, if they get big enough, regulators will knock on their doors and tell them, you're missing this too. And all of our community will eventually learn this the hard way. It's what Firefox, or it's what Thunderbird has been facing. 2 months ago, I was getting yelled at by folks saying like, no, you have to do this. And we were kind of like, well, we'll get to it, but we need to figure out if the fine, points before we proceed on this. And I think that it's a good thing for the open source community as a whole that Firefox has to go through this. I feel sad that they have to learn by putting this out and having folks like you who are people we definitely need to be a part of our community and be providing feedback on what we do get scared off because that's ultimately not what we need. If Mozilla is going to accomplish the things that I know that you want, which is to be a kind of a check on a Google and Apple
Absolutely.
owned world, at least for the web and browser engines. And there's a lot of other things. Don't forget Rust came out of
Yeah.
Mozilla and quite a few other kind of key pieces of open source technology came out of Mozilla, and that spirit and that soul is still there. And it's more of a learning how to exist in a world that's dominated by an entirely different species of cat,
Yeah.
which are the mega tech corps who, don't give a crap about this. They're not going to apologize for their terms of service.
No, and they don't
And,
have to because their community generally doesn't really care. They're okay
uh,
with trading
and
their
our
data with the
community doesn't
service.
call them out.
Yeah,
We both know there are a lot of Linux users. There's a lot of open source enthusiasts who are using Chrome,
yeah.
and they're
And
not worried about
even
that.
I, as a Linux and open source enthusiast, I make my videos on YouTube, which is definitely not a data and privacy friendly platform either. So obviously, but I think the thing is, we hold our, let's say, open source or free software champions to higher
And you
standards
should.
because on the YouTube side of things, for some people on the Gmail, Google side of things, there is no alternative. For a lot of people, there is no alternative to those platforms. For Firefox, Firefox is the alternative, and we
Yep.
want it to be better than the ones that we know are data hungry or just privacy infringing all the time. And you said that I wouldn't really like the answer, which is that Firefox and Mozilla has to learn those steps. The main issue I have isn't that those terms are very scary, because, of course, if you look at them word per word, they are not that scary. There's still the underlying thing of they could change them without notifying people, which I
Yep.
don't really like.
Yep.
And I'm not necessarily convinced with the selling data part, but that's just me and I can overlook that. The main problem is Mozilla has been learning in public with these kind of mistakes for a long while now, and it's getting
Yes.
hard to forgive these sort of mistakes because they've done a lot of those same blunders. And as someone who has worked in communication and marketing for about 15 years, I now even teach students about communication and marketing. And
Yep.
these are mistakes that not a single one of my interns would have made. Like, they would have known that this is not a good way to communicate this stuff to the specific Firefox community. And that's really what annoys me the most, is that they have had, I think, 10 years to learn these mistakes, to learn from these mistakes. The optics are just horrible. They just announced a new board of directors. They announced a new CEO. They announced that not necessarily a pivot towards AI, but a renewed focus on AI, which we all know depends on a lot of data. And a week after that, they announced new terms of use that are, obviously they've been in the works for longer than a week, but the announcement comes right after. And it seems like they're going to collect some data. So the entire optics has been entirely mismanaged. So can you tell us a bit more about why this keeps happening for at least specifically Firefox, but sometimes it feels like it's the entire Mozilla Foundation?
It's sure. It's a lot of things all crossing at one moment in that we have first off AI. And the way I see it is, and the thing I was excited about this long before ChatGPT, is these amazing open source models that are out there that do really incredible stuff and can save a lot of time. I think about it in the context of email. What we have these old classifiers for sorting emails. You can think about, what Gmail does with the social, the newsletter, and everything. But with the new open source models, you can tell them how you want emails sorted, how what you're interested in seeing bubble to your like priority. That's incredible capability that a person, instead of writing custom filters or something, could just tell a small language model running on their own device, this is what I want to see. This other stuff you can bucket into these places. That's amazing innovation. So AI is one pillar. And what Mark has said, who's the president of Mozilla, is that his concern is that open source AI will not come out victorious. and he feels like that it needs to
Hmm.
for our movement. And so that's one pillar, you know, and that's where the AI comes in, is we believe open source AI needs to be the winner
Mhm.
out of all of it. And we poured a lot of money into that. Mozilla as a whole has poured a lot of money into promoting that future. Um, right now, you know, there's a lot going on in the world, and big tech is as powerful as ever, you know. And so when you look at the Mozilla Foundation, that's pillar two,
Hmm.
which is how do we make it so that other technology can exist in the world outside of what's created in these large corporations like the Googles and the Apples and the Microsofts, and make sure that they're not just by default always in control of everything. Um, and then you have us over here. We have Moco and MZLA, which is creating
Mhm.
Thunderbird, which is all about expressing that out into the world. And it's because AI and these regulations coming into effect and everything, it's converging on a moment where we're just trying to keep up. We're trying to address all these things. Now, the problem is who we are, in that, like we talked about earlier, we we do this stuff, we communicate about it, we try to make sure this terms of service thing didn't start with terms of service popping up on someone's machine. It started with a blog post.
Mhm.
So communicating this stuff and opening up, to use something Mark said, the windows and the doors. The old mistake that we've made with each of these is just not opening them up earlier, not opening up sooner, not having more conversations and creating the forums for those conversations. But I think that it's a perfect storm of, there's a lot going on that we're trying to tackle, and we're a group that is transparent about this and open to criticism. You know, people tire of criticizing groups that don't respond to
Yeah.
criticism. They don't do anything. We do. Um, Now there's a difference too. I think sometimes we give maybe too much airtime to a criticism. We should say, yeah, that was unfortunate, but there are thousands of people in the Mozilla community, and when one person messes up, like, we fix it, or a group of people mess up. I think about the Mr. Robot,
Yeah.
thing. Um, like, that was not a concerted Mozilla thing. That was a team making a mistake,
Yeah,
you
and
know.
I'm pretty sure we can attribute every blunder. I'll list a few in my own video saying, like, I got tired of Firefox specifically and how the communication around it was handled. I listed a few issues dating back to 2017. I think 2017 was the Mr. Robot thing, but there has been others. I'm sure every single one of these can be attributed to a single team just
But you're
not announcing something, not working properly. And I think the main problem with Mozilla is that it is too big to just be a community project. It is too big. It has too much money involved, too many users probably as well. Even though the market share of Firefox is just slowly dropping, it is still a pretty big project in terms of numbers of users. And Mozilla isn't just Firefox as well. So it is too big to just be a community project, but it's also too community focused to be run as a company or a corporation, and it feels like it is being run like a corporation.
Well, yeah, that's the dilemma, right? Like, that's the issue. Is you said it better than I could have. There's so much. There's a lot of resources there. There's a lot of things going on, and we have a framework. If you go in to develop Firefox, you go in to develop Thunderbird, is is uh is a Chimera. It's If you look at Thunderbird's module owners, which are the people who control the different parts of the code base of Thunderbird, they're not all employees.
Hmm.
Some of them are just community members who have been active in the project for a long time. And so you're always dealing with this chimera group. And it's frankly, it's how Mozilla thinks of itself, is the companies are the vehicle for influencing change in the world. They are not the end goal. They're not profit. I know that, you know, I see stuff online about, oh, they're making this move to make money or whatever. I've spoken now to every team inside of Mozilla, to senior leadership. To say that profit is not the motivating factor is the greatest understatement of all time. They all are there to address the problems that they see around the state of tech.
I think this is an interesting thing because you say you talk to senior people, senior executives maybe, or at least team leaders inside of Mozilla, and they all say basically that we're not doing this for profit, we're doing this because we want to change the landscape of technology, we want to fight big tech. But every time you read a blog post from Mozilla specifically talking about Firefox, they always mention the fact that they need to be more financially independent, and they always talk
Yep.
about this financial incentive, saying we need to generate more revenue. Every single blog post or refocus talks about this, which I think highlights the disconnect between maybe the people working on the actual projects and the leadership or communication team. I'm not sure if I should lump
No,
people
it's
together
not a
here.
disconnect, but you have to think about it from a different frame. The thing that Mozilla is thinking about is well, I'm talking about the corporation right now. Because the foundation, for instance, is supported by donors.
Mhm.
And so is MZLA
Yeah.
Thunderbird. It's 100% supported by
Mhm.
donors, and not big donors, all users, all small donors. Um, Firefox is different historically. That's because of a historic thing in that they get money from the Google search
Mhm.
contract. The percentage of which what that represents has gone down over time, you know. And the goal ultimately is for Firefox to have a variety of revenue sources so in support of the mission.
Mhm.
They know that and your audience knows this. Everyone knows this. To just say tomorrow, no search deal
Yeah. You can't
would
do it. Yeah.
it would irreparably harm the development of
Absolutely.
Firefox.
And I don't think many people in the community are asking Mozilla to
Well, no,
completely ditch Google. Yeah.
yeah, I want to lay
I
the
think people
landscape. You know,
recognize this. Like, of course, people would love it if Mozilla could be financially independent. And
yep,
sometimes it does feel like myself and other members of the community are saying, "Oh, yeah, you should like be more independent, but not like that." Which
yeah,
I
yeah, exactly.
totally understand might not be
Yep.
very
But
productive.
when
Sure.
they call out what they're trying to do, what they're trying to say, and you called this out, there are probably better ways that we can find to consistently spread this message, is that we have to find a way to be sustainable. This is what Thunderbird talks about. How are we going to be sustainable in the future and not be dependent on, Thunderbird has figured this out. We're
Mm.
sustainable and we're growing that base, and it grows considerably every year. Amazing. Now we're looking at how do we offer more value to our users? That's where we're at. Firefox is over here. They're also thinking about the same thing. One, how do we offer more value to our users? It's kind of interesting that for the longest time they would sit on features that were really amazing for a really long time, just like we got to get it perfect. And now they're kind of saying like, no, we've got to ship these
Yeah.
features such as vertical tabs and stuff like yesterday. Like we've had them, we've been working on them. Let's just get them
Yeah,
out the door.
and I honestly love that direction. I mentioned like these updates, specific the updates to Thunderbird 136 and Firefox 136 in my latest news video. I think it was like Saturday, and I said I'm really happy about those changes.
Yep.
I think the
Yep.
direction the products are going is great.
Yep. And so, to thank you for that. To circle back, the thing that there's no disconnect, but there's a realization that if the corporation, not we, they don't find ways to be sustainable and not so reliant on a single partner.
Hmm.
That's going to provide a better ecosystem and also allow for just more experiments, more learn, products potentially. And so um, I think that it's fair to say the communication hasn't been great, but I think that I could make a case, and I'd be willing to make a case to anyone, that the heart and soul behind it is what is still good, is very good. And, there are no stock options at the Mozilla Corporation or at MZLA. There, there are no, there's, you're not a public company. They exist to adhere to the Mozilla Manifesto, and they're owned by a nonprofit. And ultimately, we talk, at least in MZLA, but I know MoCo has to talk about, MoCo is Mozilla Corporation, it's shorthand, has to talk about this. It's we the Our board asks us about impact. They care a lot less about profit. Profit only exists to serve the mission and the Mozilla Manifesto. And what our conversations are about are impact. How are you making an impact in the world? How are you ensuring that this good technology that we know needs to exist is coming to fruition? So I know we've gone on a tangent now, but
No, it's
but
very interesting because I think it outlines the fact that the real problem isn't the people, the features, the goal, the board, or maybe not even the executives. It's the way all of these things come together and are communicated to users. I think the root
yeah,
of the issue is, and maybe has been for the past 10 years, how this is being communicated. Because the things that are being done are good, like mostly good. They can be misinterpreted, or at least they can be looked at unfavorably. I did so for some of those things, but the goal inside is to fight big tech, is to have a credible alternative to big tech. Right now, we can't really say that Firefox is having a lot of success fighting
yeah.
specifically Chrome, Chromium, and all the browsers based on that engine.
Well, it's a mixed bag too there because, for instance, Thunderbird is up considerably in our user
Yeah,
base.
totally.
And Firefox on mobile platforms also is growing at a pretty rapid
Oh,
pace.
that's interesting.
So, there I think people are ready. I think more and more people are ready for an alternative. I
Mhm.
know that I've seen a change amongst friends and family where they just say like, you know what, I don't really want to use
Yeah, Chrome
this.
or yeah.
Yeah, exactly, anymore. And so I see that everywhere, and that's great. And there's one other thing, and I think you said this the other day, but I don't know if you've said it yet today. It's fair to hold Mozilla to a different standard
Mm.
than these other guys. It's completely fair. So I say this to the community members out there. It's fair. I'm not upset about that. You should hold us to a different standard because we're saying we're doing this for the reason of good.
Yeah, and there's also
A
the
good
very unique
thing.
situation that right now Firefox specifically is the last hope. Like there's currently at least nothing else. You either
Yes.
use a Chromium based browser and so you reinforce Google's monopoly on how the web is rendered. Not everyone cares about this, but people who know what it means tend to care about it. Or you use Firefox or a Firefox fork, but Firefox forks cannot exist without Firefox. So that's probably why people are as upset, or at least as sensitive to any of the changes
Yep.
made to
It's
Firefox. It's the last one. It's the last thing
Yep.
we have.
It's a Star Wars thing,
Yeah,
We thought you
exactly.
were the chosen one.
Exactly. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so obviously
I,
people, myself included, will be like maybe more annoyed by every single little change that we don't agree with because this is our last project that most of us really enjoy. We don't use it because it's the least bad. We tend to use it
Yeah.
because we like it. And so anything that breaks that like or at least diminishes it is always viewed as very, very problematic.
I think what, these are the conversations I'm having. I think coming out of this, we've got to create a community group for all of Mozilla around communication and pull them into this is what, terms of service. This is something that we're working on. Do you want to provide feedback on this early on? And um, I know for Thunderbird, but I do think the rest of Mozilla is going to get in on this, is opening up the doors to these type of conversations in our community forums. In the past, something like this, and this is what we're seeing, something like this is a problem to be solved by a subject matter expert, and then released. But clearly it's holds a lot of significance for a lot of folks. And it makes sense. I am the type of person, just like a lot of audience members, just like a lot of community members, who checks the terms of service of the stuff they use. At least, I do a scan of it, or now
Yeah.
I guess the new way to talk about it is run it through ChatGPT and have it pull out bullet points. But I get that. And I think we're gonna have to adjust to how we operate in this space. And then for past sins, I think that you called out at the end of your video. I think that it's not something you can really even talk about, because I don't know how we'd talk about it in a way that wasn't like a 5 or 6 hour
Yeah, of course.
conversation. But Mozilla is changing for the better, acknowledging where they've fallen short, where we've all fallen short in the context of your video. This is a good moment for us to continually like look at what we're trying to be and what our user expectations are and our community's expectations are. But I've seen it internally where there's a ton of conversation around how are we going to address some of the concerns that people have raised? How are we going to show them through both our actions and our words that we're here to do what we say we're here to do?
So there are efforts internally to try and maybe change how things are communicated, maybe communicate them a little bit more, well, before they are actually delivered to the entire user base.
Yeah. And they're active conversations. What falls under that umbrella? We're really fortunate in the Thunderbird world in that we have a community council with a ton of power. And that community council reviews the budget, the roadmap, a lot of different areas of projects that we work on over in Thunderbird land. So I often get a lot of feedback really early on when something isn't going the direction that they think it should go. And usually that's a big win. It's a big help to be able to, well, I say it's like seeing around corners. Somebody says, well, that didn't strike me so good. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me why. What did we miss here? But I think that, and I'll quote Mark again, what he said last year at the big Mozilla, it's called Moz Week, when everybody got together. He said, open the doors, open the windows, let everyone in. And I do think that the entire organization is trying to figure out across all Mozilla how you do that. And I think it's easier for some of our groups, it's harder for others, but figuring that out, I think, will ultimately lead us back to a place where we can engender more trust, because we're a lot more transparent.
I think that's the way to do it. Well, personally, at least it would satisfy me if I could just have a not just a peek behind the curtain, but just rip out the curtain and just look at what actually exists, what is there. Because, like we said, it is a community project that's too big to be run like your generic 10-person distro for Linux, and it's also too rooted in the community to be operated as a corporation. It feels, at least to me, like it's been operated like a corporation would. So we're only telling you stuff once it's ready, once it's done. If you want that peek behind the curtain,
Yep.
you can have it, because you can, of course, contribute to the code base. You can look at the stuff, but there are some discussions that you're not going to be privy to. And so I think
It's
opening all of this is good. At least I would think it's suitable.
it's the push and pull too, right? Like tech companies generally, and I understand the reason why, you want, to some extent, you want to be able to put things out in a state where it's ready.
Yeah.
Even my own developers, they 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 kind of like tense up when it's time to put something out where that is
Everyone.
not yet ready,
Yeah, well,
that it's
I
not
think
yet.
everyone who's worked in either software development or, like I did, product management and project management, every time you're ready to press the push to prod button, you're
But
always
I'm talking,
cringing a bit.
yes, I 100%, but I'm talking about in our specific type of
Hmm.
organizations, we actually expect to put out stuff before we've even really 100%
Hmm.
gotten to a point where we're comfortable with it. This is what, even if you talk about myself with the community council that we have, I clue them into everything, but sometimes I'm nervous because I'm like, I haven't really decided what I think about this yet. And so I don't really want to open it up yet because I don't even know what I believe, and
Yeah,
and I don't want you to criticize the work before I understand what I believe about it. And that happens all the time in open source software if you're doing it the right way, if you're not
yeah,
just throwing it over the wall. And so uh, there's a push and pull here, right? And it's constant, and especially in folks, we exist in a world where even Thunderbird has this. We hire folks who have worked in other software agencies, and then we have to can like indoctrinate them into how we do things. And that's a process too, because they're like, I really want to,
yeah,
to have a bunch of, randos from the internet commenting on what I'm doing. It's not done yet. It's not ready yet. And, but, that's our challenge. And that's something that we have to continually work on and strive towards. And so,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's well, it's just the open source or free software process. You have to show things even before you're confident in their quality, even before you've actually constructed the entire skeleton of what you want to do. And I can totally understand. I would not imagine myself like putting out the A roll and the B roll of a video, just publishing it to YouTube and saying, "Hey, these are the building blocks for my future video. What do you think
exactly.
about those?" Well,
Yeah.
it's crap.
I,
It's not color graded. It's not edited. There are many, many mistakes in it. This would be very hard for me to accept, obviously.
I have a perfect example. When years before we actually rolled out Thunderbird Supernova with the new design elements, we laid out very early designs. And I remember my team being so ready to do that. They were like, we're gonna show what the future could look like, and they're smiling, they're ready to do that. They put it out on the internet, and they got some good feedback, but they got a lot of bad
Yeah.
feedback too. And they're like, didn't we say in the post that it's like we're just playing with ideas? And they're
Yeah.
like,
We
I'm
we want the
uninstalling Thunderbird
feedback.
right now. If this is the direction you're going, I hate it. I hate you, and it's like
Yeah.
and that's the hard part about being out in the open. That I
Yeah.
understand why groups end up, waiting to share the work because they're afraid of getting criticized before the work is done.
Well, especially when you're working on something very visual, something that has a user experience, an interface. It's not like you're building the next version of a super obscure framework or library where there is no visual element. People who know better will criticize you about, I don't know, the feature, how you implemented it, the API you're offering. But it's more technical, and so the discussion is more on how can I use your thing. It's not on I hate the look, I don't like the graphical thing that you've built, I don't want to use that, I want my habits to stay the same. It's not the same perception, I think. And so yeah, it can be very difficult to put that work out there, which all goes back to how do you communicate that this is a first draft, a very early version, and how do you actually publish this first draft instead of
Yep.
just publishing the final release and saying, this is what's happening?
Yep. And I think that I think this is a challenge that we'll wrap our head around. You know, I know that in your video, um, you brought up 10 years of missteps. I think that's, I think that's, there's definitely truth there. You know, before I was around in the Mozilla verse, there were some disappointing moments there too for me too. Um, but I do think that I'm encouraged because I see every day that more and more of the right people are in the room who have the right goals and values, especially with this community, especially aligned with the open source community, who are advocating for doing things in a way that is in line with what we say that our values are. And ultimately, you know, I believe that open source software has to win.
Yeah.
And we've seen it win in a number of areas that even what I'm kind of getting older. When I started my career, did not look like a possibility. I worked in a data center and I remember saying, hey, we're going to convert all of these machines to Linux, and we're going to run the Apache web server on it instead of IIS. And I was laughed out of the room. That will never happen. That's the dumbest idea we've ever heard. And, that has changed,
Yeah.
now I know like how many IIS servers are there?
Yeah, no one would even question what
Yeah,
you
yeah,
suggested specifically. Yeah.
yeah. And but I've seen that, GitHub and GitLab and all the projects that exist there and that are active and growing, it's just amazing. And I think that when it comes to Firefox and browsing the web, I think that as much as folks, might be declaring the death of Firefox, and Thunderbird died a long time ago,
Yeah. Well,
according to
it was
everyone.
well resurrected.
Yeah.
This honestly was something that really surprised me at the time because I used to use Thunderbird way back when I was using, I think, Windows XP or something,
Yep.
before I even discovered Linux. And then it slowly petered out, and seeing it revived with actually millions in funding from users was a shock moment for me. I was like, yeah, that can happen. Okay.
Yep.
Well, and it also gave me confidence that other projects that, like for example, Firefox, who seem like they're on a downward trend, can maybe also pick things back up.
Yep. And I think that it will. I have to be optimistic, but I think that it will only because the way that the world changed, and frankly, the way that these big tech companies have been able to really put their thumbs on the scale to benefit themselves and their market share, especially when it comes to browsers, but also email.
Mm.
Um, it was it put a lot of real pressure on a player like Firefox or a player like Thunderbird. I I it's really telling that even still today, there's like a little in Windows, there's like a little news feed thing on the bottom left hand corner. If you click it and you open up an article from there
Yeah, it's
or an email address from
it's
there,
Microsoft Edge.
it's Microsoft Edge and Outlook.
Yeah,
It will ignore your
no
default.
matter your defaults. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I still do not understand how this is legal. At the very least, in the EU, I do not understand how this is still allowed. Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. I actually talked to some folks the other day about that who are regulators in the EU and said, I don't understand how
Yeah.
this is okay. But but I do think, and this is, I guess, where we can leave it because this is my hopeful message. I do think the tide is turning, at least in how people, even outside a broader group than our open source, folks and our techie folks, are are really taking notice of this and tuning into this and saying, do I really want these tech companies to be as powerful as they are and have complete dominance and make all my decisions about how it is that I use tech? And to turn your back on Mozilla at this point, even with our flaws, would be a really sad state of affairs because we do have as you said, resources to make a dent in this world. We have, despite the issues, we have a lot of reach. And frankly, and I said this when we were talking off the record, but I'll tell it to everybody. This is the time that we need you most. Help us stop, you know, making these miscommunications. Come in. There's still all the open source communities that existed before are still there. Firefox is still developed by an open source community. You can get really exposed to this stuff just by being around. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to commit code. It even helps when folks are sitting in our matrix rooms or, in Thunderbird land, sitting in our matrix rooms or on our mailing list and calling out things that you see because that's open source's superpower. That's the superpower of these projects. It's not to be able to go and raise billions and millions of dollars in venture capital. It's to have a bunch of people who are passionate about this stuff around the world come and join us and help us. And so that's my impassioned plea for folks not to leave the Mozilla ecosystem, but to come. You can always email me. You can always reach out to me, whether it's on our Matrix channels, whether there's plenty of I don't know if I'm going to share my email address
Yeah,
right now, but
probably
like
not. But
but
if you need it, you can find it in the right
yeah,
channels looking at the Thunderbird community. Yeah.
exactly. And I would encourage you to do that.
Well, I'll say that for me personally, the talks we had, like first for preparing this interview, so before you actually went and checked to get that information, because full transparency, we talked like for half an hour. It was at the end of last week. And you said to me like you didn't want to record this interview right now because you wanted to have all the actual facts and talking to people at Mozilla, which you did. And so now we're recording this. And so from this off the record talk and this talk today, I do have some hope. Like I said, I like personally the direction the products are going towards. I like Firefox, the new features, the speed they're adding them now, and the progression I'm seeing. I like it. I like Thunderbird. Thunderbird was never really in question specifically. I still have my doubts. I need to see Mozilla being run more openly. I need to see these doors and windows being opened. I need to have that transparency, that maybe owning up to the various communication mistakes, so I can regain my trust in specifically how Firefox is run, and then maybe I'll go back to using Firefox. Right now I'm still using a fork, which it's using Firefox somewhat, but it's not like the specific product. But I would love to keep using Firefox. Like I told you when off the record last week, I like those tools. They're my tools. I customize them. I like how they're set up. I don't want to change. I don't want to move my profiles to another one, to a fork, losing out on some feature or some specific DRM stuff to play back videos. I don't want to. I'm comfortable. I like those. And for me to move out of specifically Firefox is a pain and an imposition, and I would prefer not having to do so. And so if Mozilla can open up relatively fast and show all of that transparent stuff, all the efforts that you say are going on at Mozilla from people trying to change all of this, then I guess this would, let's say, mollify me on the issue.
yeah,
But right now, I'm still not utterly convinced. I need to see that change happening.
yeah, better than just to assuage you, what I'm going to advocate for, and I know that it's shared amongst leadership, is we don't want to just make our users say, okay, yeah, that's okay with me. We want to turn that into enthusiasm.
Hmm.
We want folks to say, hell yeah, I'm using Firefox, like I'm using Thunderbird. That's makes me feel really good.
Hmm.
And so we're gonna go a step above that because frankly, that's what the world needs Mozilla right now, the truest form of Mozilla. And uh, we're just gonna have to meet that moment. And we're gonna work really hard to do that. So my goal is in 12 months, Nick won't just say, yeah, I use Firefox, but
I
like,
went
hell yeah,
back
I use
begrudgingly.
Firefox.
No, that's not it. I went back with enthusiasm. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So
Well,
we're gonna
I'm
work.
I'm all for it. I'm ready for it. 12 months, 6 months, whatever. I would love to. Sure.
Yep. Yep. Sounds good.
Well, I think that covers everything I had in mind. All my questions are addressed. Do you have anything you want to add specifically?
Well, this is just a plug for Thunderbird. If you liked what I said and you want to check out Thunderbird, we actually just changed to monthly releases instead of our ESR. So if you go and download from the website today, you'll get a monthly release of Thunderbird that's updated monthly. So you get the features, as soon as they're done, pretty much. Additionally, if you're on Linux, our favorite operating system, we're working with maintainers and working on getting FlatHub and our snaps moved, or at least have a channel
Hmm.
for the monthly release. So we keep moving forward, and our goal is to make it so no one in your family, you don't have to, and no one in your family has to open Outlook again. Um, so
That's a wonderful
yeah,
world.
yeah, it is. It is cool. But that's what we've got going on.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for everything you brought to the conversation, for clarifying all of this, and for the super interesting conversation. I'm sure people will reach out in the comments, and obviously, if you want to talk specifically to Ryan, you can find his email address or find the community channels that you can use for Thunderbird and ask all the questions. Like he said, the doors are opening up, and they were already open for all of that sort of conversation. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for reaching out and offering this talk, and thank you for the work you did collecting all of this information as well, and getting the temperature of the room in various teams at Mozilla. And well, I guess we can always do that again anytime you have something you want to tell to the community, to say to the community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye. So this concludes this interview. Thank you all for watching it to the end if you managed to make it this far. And now it's time I leave you on this message from our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. You know about them by now. They make laptops and desktops that come with Linux pre-installed. They have supported the channel for, I think, 3 full years now, and I only use their devices these days. Everything I do on this channel, on the podcast, on what I do for Patreons and YouTube members, everything is done on one of their laptops, and all my gaming needs are served by one of their desktops, a Tuxedo Cube. They have a huge range of computers. You can pick the parts, you can customize the keyboard layouts, you can have your own logo laser engraved on the laptops. They have something for everyone at every price point. So click the link in the description to discover their range. They are based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world. I can only recommend them, and as always, the link is in the description. So, thank you all for watching. You know where the usual YouTube buttons are. You can click them to make sure that this video works and that the channel keeps growing. And in the meantime, thank you all for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!